We couldn't be separated. And so when I say I want to remember 19 years later, September 11th, and what happened, I also want to remember 19 years later what happened on September 12th and how we came together to talk a little bit about that. Our guest joining us right now. My question today, gentlemen, I know you're going to talk about healing and in many other ways in personal relationships in your lives and how we deal. But as a group, as a nation, how can we heal? Our good friends from Base Camp, Grace Explorations, Kevin DeVries joins us right now, and Matt Kenney will be speaking coming up this weekend at a Base Camp. He's a men's ministry leader, certified counselor. He'll be sharing his story, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but how childhood abuse and trauma empowered him to lead this men's ministry and what he's doing to bring people together and cause some healing today. Gentlemen, thanks for being here with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin.
So let's start there. I mean, guys, there's a lot to break off and sort of chew up here to digest, but how do we come together healing in our lives, in personal relationships, with ourselves, but also as a nation, as a group? I mean, this is tough, but as a counselor, Matt, I think you're qualified to take it on.
Yeah, I mean, just over the last few minutes, hearing you replay some of those recordings, that I can remember the time, I can remember the place where I was sitting when I started hearing some of those things 19 years ago. And that's part of my story. And I think as we look at the places in our own lives where we, where we encountered moments that stick with us like that, as we look back on those and as we use those stories to be the lens that we look through oftentimes when we see the world and we see others and we see our relationships and how the world works and our ideas about God, we have to unpack those things. We have to go back and we have to reflect and we have to think about those things because those stories are the things that we interpret our lives through. And so that's why I'm excited to share a little bit about my own this weekend.
Yeah, Kevin, I know this is something you guys are excited about to do in a unique setting. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up here in a bit, because I think it is something that people are going to want to be a part of. But how important is it for us to go through that healing process, Kevin?
Well, if you're not healed, you're just going to continue to wound other people. So healed people heal people. So what we're seeing right now in our society and our culture, I think at large, forgive the bad voice here, I was over exuberant at one of my kids' cross-country meets earlier this week. But it's this idea that you're just going to be part of this smaller narrative, and you're just going to be wounding other people, and you're going to be caught up in this small story for the rest of your life unless God releases you into the big story. And so then you have context. Now you're going into every story, into every cultural crisis with, hey, what can I do to make this situation better? Instead of throwing more gas on the fire, which is really what's, I think, happening right now, as people are just wounding other people. They're wounding themselves because they're not well. It's not that they're bad or good or evil. It's just they're just not well. And when you're not well, you're distracted by small stories because you're trying to cover up your own story because you can't live your own story. So you have to then project your other failures onto other people. We see this a lot with sports. You know, if a team does well one year, then people feel good about themselves. And most of that is because they don't feel good about themselves inherently or intuitively to begin with. So what we're going to try and do is ask one simple question and give a myriad of different answers. But we're asking guys Sunday night at the barn, because we are not at Founders Sunday night. We're actually meeting at Wildwood Family Farms. Is what is the story that you're living in right now? What story are you personally living in right now?
Yeah. And how important that is for us to get a glimpse of that. You know, I think the other thing that I see too, and Matt, maybe you've got some experience that you can comment here, is a story that we're telling ourselves or the world may tell us is plenty different from the reality of what the real story is. And I'm sure identity plays a big role in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like I even think of when I said, I was listening to those stories a few minutes ago of 9/11, and I could feel my heart beating faster. Like my body has memories of things that have happened in my life. And so to be able to take a look at those things and really dive in and understand the impact that those stories have on me today and how I see all of even the events that we're seeing around in our world, the people that we come in contact with. I mean, I think that recently, what we've seen at my practice is just the unbelievable number of marriages that that are hurting, that people where maybe things were a little bit bad before this whole circumstances that we're in right now intensified things, but now things have just gotten so difficult for so many people, and so I'm hoping that this weekend is a safe place for us to just kind of level the playing field with one another and share with one another and really take a look at those stories and what stories we're believing and where we're living.
Yeah.
You know, you bring up a great point, and Kevin, I know you're seeing this too, but as a counselor, Matt, how many extra things are being complicated by this year, the pandemic, the economic shutdown in our state, and all across the country, all this uncertainty got to play a big role.
You bet. It's uncertainty, loneliness, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
Just, all the things we struggle with get intensified when the heat gets turned up, when the stress comes. And so whether it's it's a job loss or a broken relationship, or maybe the loss of a loved one. For some of us, we've lost people close to us over the last several months. All those things just intensify everything for us. And so we're seeing a lot of that right now.
Yeah. Kevin DeVries, again, it's Base Camp Grace Exploration, digging into the stories of what's happening in our lives and how we can find some healings, some real growth. We got to unpack these moments. It's just thinking about September 11th. I want to remember it, right? I don't want to forget, but I also want to be able to heal from these moments in my life, because the trauma that's around September 11th, or the trauma that's around some event that happened in our lives, no matter what it is, we have to get past it to get through it. And there's some specific ways to do that. You guys are going to dig into that, but you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I think the ultimate objective of a lot of what we do at Base Camp is to help guys get unstuck in their stories. And trauma, diabolically and divinely, actually freeze frames parts of your story. So all of us are remembering September 11th today because that was a freeze frame moment of, hey, wow, what happened? Similar to when JFK was assassinated for a former generation. You never forget the memories, the smells, where you were, who you were talking to, the emotions that you felt. And so part of what we try to do is get guys to get into their story, jump into the dragon's mouth, if you will, go to those days when the dragon showed up, when everything that you thought was normal was suddenly upended. And currently what we're dealing with right now is we're dealing with multiple days that are like that. They're like waves. It's like you get over one episode of anxiety or trauma and then another one hits you. And so there's not even a lapse or a space where you can heal and process and interpret what story that you're living in. But we find the best way to get into that trauma, to get into that collective trauma, is to hear another man's story, and perhaps in the process of hearing that story, being able to have some tools, some skills to be able to interpret your own, and then eventually get to the point where instead of carrying around a shattered sword, which is emblematic of a story that's filled with shame, that's small, that is hidden, that never becomes strong, eventually over time, that shattered sword then can become reforged, and it can become strong, and it can be something that you can unsheath at the appropriate times with strength, not to harm yourself or to harm other people, but to bring strength into a situation because your story no longer owns you. You own that story. And that's a delicate process because that reforging process involves a lot of hammering. It involves a lot of heat. It involves a lot of pressure. It involves a lot of anxiety. But at the end, that sword, that story can be put back in a man's hand. And that's, I think, what we need in this moment of crisis. We need strong men and women that can stand up and say, I understand the times that we live in, and I'm not going to freak out over these smaller issues. I'm going to focus on the big epic story that God is writing for all of us. And I'm going to just trust God that everything that's happening right now was meant to be to really bring about maybe another era, another age, if you will. And all my job, all I have to do is wake up every day and ask God, what are you up to and how can I be a part of that? Instead of running here, there, and everywhere and getting distracted, God, what are you up to? What are you saying? What are you doing in my life and the life of other people and the world at large? And how can I participate in that grand enterprise? How can I be part of something that's bigger than me? And then the healing can start coming, because now you're involving your own smaller story and all of its issues with a bigger story. And as you're becoming part of that bigger story, I think some great healing can happen. But we have to give guys a bigger picture, while also giving them the micro picture as, hey, let's start picking out shrapnel, which is what Matt and several of our soul surgeons do, which is why we're doing what we're doing under a tent Sunday night, is we're setting it up as a spiritual mash tent, and we're going after the shrapnel on the men's soul. We're going to give an extended time of Q&A where Matt can share his story, allow some of his own shrapnel to surface. Guys can identify with that, and then give a protracted period of time where guys can ask any question they want. And we'll have a panel of people that will help them process that through table discussions, through prayer, whatever. We want guys to be better after base camp Sunday night than when they came.
Matt, I got to ask you, we've got John, who I know pretty well. He lost a son in service to our country, who actually commented here in the chat. And if you want to ask a question or comment, you always can. We stream live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. But John says, we need to be forgiving and ask forgiveness, and peace shall come. What do you think, and how much of a role does that, our last question here, baby, how much of a role does that forgiveness play?
Yeah, forgiveness is absolutely huge. I know even in my own story, when I look back on the events of my life and the people who have harmed me, when I hold all kinds of bitterness and unforgiveness inside of me, it's kind of like I'm a container, and if I fill it up with all that stuff, I don't have any room for anything. And so forgiveness is the way that I pour some of that out. I pour some of that bitterness out. I pour some of that anger out. And as I pour that out in a safe place, I just create space inside of me for God to fill some things inside of me. I create space for other men, other women in my life that I'm in community with to fill me with good things like compassion and understanding and things like that. So forgiveness is an absolute necessity. And, as a Christian counselor and a pastor, I just believe that there is no healing outside of the work of Christ in our lives. Yeah. And so the forgiveness that we have because of what Jesus has done for us is the model that we follow for all of our lives. So,
Matt Kenney, he'll be speaking this weekend at Grace Explorations and Base Camp. And our good friend Kevin DeVries with us. It's a special edition. We'll make sure that you get the link so that you can RSVP if you'd like to be there for guys under the tent at Wildwood Family Farms. And, of course, Kevin, we appreciate you being here with us again, as always. And, Matt, great to meet you. Great to have you on for the first time. Thank you. We'll have to have you back.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, gentlemen. Put that link in the comments here. So in case you want to make sure that you're there, you'll be able to RSVP and check it out and go back and watch this again, too, if you'd like to on Facebook. Catch any of the show as well. Always just search online the iHeartRadio app or woodradio.com for West Michigan Live. Back right after this.